Welcome to Lectures on First Meditation, Part 1, Motivation and Method of Hyperbolic Doubt. Throughout this three-part video series, we're going to discuss some key elements in Descartes' first meditation. In Part 1, we're going to talk about the motivations that Descartes has for undertaking his project in Meditations on First Philosophy. We're also going to discuss his famous method of hyperbolic doubt, which, by the way, is sometimes also called Descartes' methodological skepticism. In Part 2, we're going to discuss how Descartes doubts sensory knowledge, and this will involve a discussion of Descartes' famous dreaming argument. And in Part 3, we'll discuss how Descartes doubts intellectual knowledge. This will include a discussion of Descartes' famous evil genius hypothesis. So let's get started right away by reading from First Meditation. Descartes begins like this. He says, "Some years ago, I was struck by the large number of falsehoods that I had accepted as true in my childhood, and by the highly doubtful nature of the whole edifice that I had subsequently based on them. I realized that it was necessary, once in the course of my life, to demolish everything completely and start again, right from the foundations, if I wanted to establish anything at all in the sciences that was stable and likely to last." Now, there's already a lot of things to notice in these first couple of sentences. For instance, notice the reference to the edifice in the first sentence. The building metaphor that we've talked about appears right away in the very first sentence. Descartes construes knowledge as being analogous to a building. And what he has noticed is that his building is cracked, it's crumbly, it has broken windows, and he's beginning to suspect that there may be other faults with the building that he can't even see. He has realized that at least once in his lifetime, what he should do is, as he puts it, demolish everything completely and start from the foundations. Notice the reference to the foundations. What we're going to do is demolish our beliefs. That's what Descartes is saying. He says he wants to question and demolish each and every one of his beliefs and see whether he can find a foundation upon which he can build a new building of knowledge, a new system of beliefs. Because he figures that this is the only way that he'll be able to build a system of knowledge that is, as he puts it, stable and likely to last. Notice that the main motivation then for Descartes' entire project is that we want to avoid the mistake of believing that something is true when in fact it is false. And this is a squarely Socratic concern. It's about avoiding the illusion of wisdom. Notice that Descartes suggests that we should proceed by demolishing everything completely and starting again right from the foundations. And at first glance, this looks like a private, subjective search for a system of beliefs. If we take seriously what Descartes tells us about meditating along with him, it seems as if what Descartes is asking us to do is to engage in a deeply personal journey of questioning our system of beliefs and coming up with a brand new system of beliefs that may or may not include some of the beliefs we currently have. And indeed, this is part of what Descartes is asking us to do in Meditations on First Philosophy. He is asking us to be mature enough to question our system of beliefs and start again from scratch. Now, he does say in the preface that this does not and should not include questioning our moral beliefs. Yet, there's something interesting about Descartes' invitation to philosophy, because for Descartes, there isn't anything all that different among us when it comes to considering us as rational intellects. So in fact, this quest for a new system of beliefs or a system of knowledge is really a public intersubjective search for nothing less than the foundations of all human knowledge. Because my intellect is really no different from your intellect. Our intellects are just reason. They're just that part of us with which we think in a rational way. And in that regard, we are all the same. So as we undertake this project individually, we are just acting as a generic intellect or a generic thinker who is thinking along and going through the process of questioning what we human beings have believed for the purpose of trying to develop a solid and stable system of knowledge that will withstand any kind of earthquake. But, says Descartes, turning back to the text, reading right where we left off, the text looked an enormous one. It's quite something to think about questioning each and every one of your beliefs and come up with a new system of beliefs that may include only some of what you used to believe. That is an enormous task, isn't it? So Descartes says, I began to wait until I should reach a mature enough age to ensure that no subsequent time of life would be more suitable for tackling such inquiries. This led me to put the project off for so long that I would now be to blame if by pondering over it any further, I wasted the time still left for carrying it out. So today, I have expressly rid my mind of all worries and arranged for myself a clear stretch of free time. I am here quite alone, and at last I will devote myself sincerely and without reservation to the general demolition of my opinions. So here we are, getting ready to demolish each and every one of our beliefs, but only for the philosophical purpose of developing a new system of knowledge. And notice that implicit here in this passage is Descartes' Platonism. He has rid his mind of all worries and arranged for himself a clear stretch of free time. Well, he has told us previously in the preface that what we need to do is we need to be willing to step away from the senses and our preconceived opinions. The stepping away from the senses part is very Platonic. We cannot focus our intellect on discovering deep fundamental truths if we're distracted because we're hungry or tired or sick. So we have to find a time to think intellectually along with Descartes, to meditate with Descartes if we're going to take this project seriously. And our first goal is to demolish all of our previous beliefs. But how do I do that? How do I question everything that I've ever believed? Well, clearly we need a method. We need some kind of procedure or algorithm, because it's not going to be very efficient to question your beliefs by going through them one by one. I mean, we could try that. We could try to say, well, do I have any reason for doubting that the sun is at the center of the solar system? Do I have any reason for doubting that 2 + 2 = 4? Do I have any reason for doubting that I'm sitting here before a computer? But of course, going that way in a haphazard way through all of our beliefs could take forever. In fact, we might never ever finish. So we need a more organized way of doubting our beliefs. Using the building metaphor, it wouldn't be very efficient to try to demolish a building by taking it apart brick by brick. It would take forever, and in fact, that's not how we demolish buildings, is it? Instead, we place charges at just the right place so that when we blow up the parts that support the building, everything comes crumbling down. And this is exactly what Descartes wants to do metaphorically. So his method is going to be a method that includes two important components, and both components of the method of hyperbolic doubt are really important. The first component is certainly this one. If I find any reason for doubting a claim, I do not accept it as true. In other words, if I find any reason at all, no matter how exaggerated or extreme, for doubting something, I stop myself from believing that it's true. I withhold assent. Remember that phrase from our discussion of skepticism, withholding assent? We're using a kind of skeptical approach to undermine skepticism in the long run, as we'll see. The second component of the method of hyperbolic doubt, says Descartes, is that I'm going to focus what I'm doing on what he calls the basic principles on which all my former beliefs rested. Again, if we just used part one of the method of hyperbolic doubt, it wouldn't be very much of a method. I would have to ask myself, do I have any reason for doubting that 2 + 2 = 4? Or how about, do I have any reason for doubting that I parked my car in lot H5 or H2 or whatever? It would just go on forever. That is not an efficient way to call into question our beliefs. So we need the second component. And the second component is analogous to placing those charges on the building at those places where if we blow those bits out, the whole building is going to come crumbling down. Because the basic principles on which all my former beliefs rested, we learn as we read on through first meditation, are two things: the senses and the intellect. because it is the senses and the intellect that are the sources of evidence for knowledge. Or to say it slightly differently, if we think about a claim that we ordinarily count as an example of knowledge, for instance, water boils at 100 degrees centigrade, and we think about where does the evidence come from for that claim, we notice that it comes from the senses. And in fact, all claims in science receive their evidence from the senses, and many of the claims in our everyday lives. The intellect is a source of knowledge for Descartes when it comes to mathematics. Those are the two pillars of the building that we're going to try to blow apart by asking whether we have any reason, no matter how exaggerated or extreme, for doubting these sources of evidence. We'll consider this in the next video and start looking at how Descartes doubts knowledge that comes from the senses. And in the third video, we'll look at how Descartes doubts knowledge that comes from the intellect. But first, I want to remind you of something important about meditations, which is that meditations has two clearly identifiable phases. First, there is what we might call a destructive phase of meditations. And this is just first meditation, where what we're doing is destroying the old building of knowledge. And we're very deliberately setting out to do that because we want to rebuild it so that the new building of knowledge is stronger, it is completely stable, and it is never going to be shaken. That constructive phase begins in second meditation and runs all the way through sixth meditation. Now, it is important to remember this two-part structure in meditations, because we don't want to make the mistake of thinking that the conclusions that Descartes reaches in first meditation are his final conclusions. They are not. The conclusions that Descartes reaches in first meditation are provisional conclusions, many of which he overcomes in second through sixth meditation. And that should make sense if we relate it to the building metaphor. We're not merely setting out to destroy the building. We want to rebuild it. We want a makeover, a radical makeover. So, of course, there's going to be a destructive phase where we begin by placing those charges in just the right place and blowing the old building apart. Not because it explodes into a million bits, but because we take out the supports and it comes crumbling down. And then we're going to start to rebuild right from the foundation. Great, so keep that in mind as you go on and study the next two videos and learn more about first meditation.